We see the campaigns and the unfortunate statistics, and unfortunately motorists driving under the influence continues to be a problem across the country and here in Michigan. Today we have Tom Sinas, a personal injury attorney who lives here in Grand Rapids, and his law firm, our sponsor, has been serving West Michigan for more than a decade to talk with us about how a personal injury case is impacted when it involves alcohol. So Tom, welcome back to 8 West.
Thank you for having me back.
Okay, so let's talk about it. We want to focus on motor vehicle crashes and those cases when a drunk driver injures someone. What kind of legal liability is likely following a situation like that?
The short answer is both civil liability and criminal liability. It's sometimes easy to forget we really have two halves of our justice system, so to speak. There's the criminal justice system and the civil justice system. When someone harms someone else while driving under the influence of alcohol, they can expect liability on both sides. What that looks like, of course, depends upon the particular circumstances of the case. But on the criminal side of things, of course, people know it's a crime to drive under the influence. What I think people may not know is that if you're driving under the influence and you injure or kill someone, that takes what may have been a misdemeanor offense and turns it into a felony offense. Of course, the greater the physical harm in a civil case, the more substantial the amount of potential civil liability that the driver has. So when you go from driving under the influence of alcohol to doing that and injuring or killing someone else, the stakes become, as you would expect, significantly higher.
So hearing that there can be civil and criminal brought against the driver, how do those impact each other going through the court system?
It's a great question, and victims of these kind of cases often find it confusing because although a particular defendant may have civil and criminal liability, they're going to have separate cases. Our criminal cases are handled by law enforcement and prosecutors. Civil cases are handled by lawyers like me. So while you may have one instance, you may end up with two different cases handled by different lawyers. Of course, though, there can be bleed over in the consequences of these two cases. So for example, if a defendant is convicted in their criminal case, that conviction or their guilty plea may have an effect on their civil case. The civil case, though, it's important to remember the burden of proof, the standard of proof, so to speak, is less. In a civil case, the victim has to show that the other driver was what we call negligent, which just means a failure to use reasonable care. And I don't think anyone would argue that drinking and driving is not reasonably careful. So different cases, all stemming from the same event, sometimes with bleed over, but particularly can be overwhelming for the victim who's been in an overwhelming situation to begin with.
So I have to imagine it happens fairly somewhat often that the actual victim is also intoxicated in a case like this. What do our laws say about how that changes things moving through this whole process?
It's a good question. It's not all that common. Occasionally it comes up, well, maybe the driver was intoxicated and maybe the victim was too. How do we deal with that in the civil realm of things? We have a state law that says if the victim's intoxication is more than 50% the cause of their injury, then they do not have a civil claim. If the victim intoxication was less than 50% or perhaps none at all, then there may be a civil claim. And so you can think of scenarios where the victim's intoxication, let's say there are two drunk drivers, may very well be a relevant and important thing. You can also think of a situation where maybe someone is walking home from a bar, and maybe they're intoxicated, but they're walking on the sidewalk, and if they're run over by a motorist while they're walking down the sidewalk, the victim's intoxication in a situation like that really is neither here nor there. So it very much depends upon the facts of the case, and I think, as we've talked about before, people shouldn't make any assumptions without getting their questions answered first.
And let's talk about getting those questions answered. Obviously, it's a very complex thing, and you don't want to navigate it by yourself. How do we get in contact with you and your team, and what does that process look like, and how early should I get in contact with you?
Well, you can find us online, www.sinasdramus.com. West Michigan phone number is 616-301-3333. And the answer to your last question is it's really never too early. You can call our firm for a free consultation. There's no charge for that consultation. And it's an opportunity to get some of your questions answered, perhaps, and run the scenario by people who do this kind of work. So people should feel free to contact us however is convenient for them and whenever they're comfortable doing so.
All right, Tom, thank you so much for bringing all this to our attention and stopping by 8 West again.
Thanks for having me back.
And this segment is sponsored by Sinas Law. We'll be right back with more 8 West, so don't go away.
Your all-access pass to every everything West Michigan.